Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Gregorian. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Detroit Economic Club, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's meeting. Before we get started, would you kindly just silence your cell phone so we don't disturb today's program?
It's my privilege to introduce today's panelists. Let me begin by starting with the gentleman on your far left. Duncan Neiderauer has served as Chief Executive Officer and a Director of NYSE Euronext since December 2007, and has served as a member of the company's Management Committee since April of that year. Prior to his current position, Mr. Neiderauer was President and Co-Chief Operating Officer of NYSE Euronext with responsibility for U.S. cash equities. Before joining NYSE in April of 2007, Mr. Neiderauer spent 22 years in various positions at Goldman Sachs and Company. Duncan serves on many boards, too numerous to name on this occasion. He earned an MBA from Emory University and a BA from Colgate University. Seated in the middle today is Patrick Doyle. Since March of 2010, Patrick oversees all company operations, strategy, vision in his role as President and CEO of Domino's Pizza. I believe the third CEO in its history.
That's right.
Patrick started his 13-year tenure with Domino's as Senior VP of Marketing, responsible for leading Domino's U.S. marketing plan, advertising agencies, and company branding strategies. Between 1997 and 2010, he held various executive positions focusing on U.S. and international business. Prior to joining Domino's, Patrick spent 6 years with Gerber Products Company up in Fremont, Michigan, in our state as well. He also serves on many corporate boards and civic and nonprofits. He earned his MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business after completing his undergraduate degree in economics at that University of Michigan.
That?
I have no blue on today, sorry. And then on your right is our moderator, Larry Phobes. Larry is the director of the Wayne State University School of Business Administration's Institute for Organizational and Industrial Competitiveness. He created, hosts, and co-produces with Detroit Public Television the Emmy Award-winning television series Leaders on Leadership. If you haven't seen it in the past, get online and find when it's going to be on next and watch it. It's really a great show. His corporate experience includes 30 years of service at Ford Motor Company, and like our other panelists, serves and contributes time on many boards. His university studies include an engineering graduate degree from Wayne State University, the Global Executive MBA from Duke University, and the executive program at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm Economic Club welcome for our panelists. And Larry, I leave it to you.
Thank you. We're going to do this a little bit differently. The terms always gets used as panelists. Think of these guys as conversationalists. We're going to have a little conversation up here. You're going to get to watch, and it's going to go where it wants to go. So we're going to be surprised, so you can be surprised.
Okay, we may be too.
Well, I hope so. The topic is innovation and building companies that last. Before we get into how that is today, I want each of these conversationalists to go back and talk about how their companies got started. Their companies started because of innovation and a market need. Start with Patrick. Some of us are old enough to remember how those late night study sessions in the dorm room got better when Domino's came to life. Right. What was the innovation?
So it was all about delivery, and we started our first store. Tom Monahan, our founder, in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and he was trying to make a little bit of money to work his way through school, and bought this first store with his brother and started delivering, and that was really the big breakthrough and the big innovation. I grew up in Midland, Michigan. And the first time I'd ever even seen delivered pizza was when I came to the University of Michigan, and they were delivering into my dorm, and it was magical. I mean, it was a 6-night, a week kind of a thing for a while until all $200 of spending money was gone. I needed to save a little bit for some beer too, but it was.
College students drink beer?
No, they do not.
No, okay.
No, there's no evidence of that. But, but yeah, I mean, it was a big deal, and it was a big idea, and Tom built it up for 37 years until he sold it to Bain Capital, and then my predecessor Dave Brandon came in, and just enormous innovation over the past decade or so under Dave's leadership.
Now, Duncan, none of us remember when your company got started. 1792, a bunch of guys sat around under a buttonwood tree in 68 Wall Street, and they came up with an agreement. What did they talk about?
Right, so they came up with the so-called Buttonwood Agreement, which we still have a copy of, and we tease the oldest member on the floor because every time we bring it out in May to celebrate a birthday, we'll be 219 or 220, I guess, next year. We asked Jim if he can find his signature on there, so maybe some of us are still were around when it started. But and here we are 220 years later, and our corporate headquarters of a now very international company is still at the corner of Wall and Broad Street, as it has been since the early 1900s. And what they really talked about was a lot of things that I think we've been reminded of the value of many times throughout history, most recently in the crisis in 2008. And what they were talking about was capital formation, price discovery, liquidity and transparency around that price discovery, and to show that some lessons still haven't been learned. We're pretty proud of how the regulated exchange industry worked during 2008 and 9, especially when you put it in stark contrast to how the less regulated, less transparent markets work, which basically open and close at the whim of the participants, right? The exchanges don't do that. And what we were talking about with the students earlier is if you're about to turn 220, it is a huge source of pride for us as a company. I say to my team a lot, how many organizations can trace their roots to the 18th century and are still not only around in the 21st century, but extremely relevant and extremely well positioned for the next couple of centuries? There's not many. You can trace our company's roots almost back to the founding of the country. We're only 16 years younger than the country. And yet here we sit in 2011, poised to reinvent the industry again, as our predecessors have done throughout time. If you didn't continuously reinvent the business and reposition it, we wouldn't be here. And as we were talking about with the students, look at the changes just in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
Now, let's fast forward to some of the issues you're facing now, being flexible, reacting to the current market. And one of the things you're both facing is customers, or lack of. Duncan has talked about individual investors are not active in the market like they used to be. You made Patrick, you've done a lot of public talk about people bought our pizzas when they're in college, but they bought somebody else's when they grew up. What do you do when the customers start walking away?
You face off with the consumer literally every hour, right?
Yeah. So. No, it's exactly right. I mean, it really comes down to being willing to take a risk and to understand how you can dramatically change your brand in the minds of the consumer. And we had a few rough years, kind of 2006 through 2008. Were not great for our business in the U.S. The international side stayed pretty strong. But we finally reached the conclusion that in the minds of the consumer, we were an adequate pizza delivered quickly for a fair price. Right. And that just wasn't good enough. We had always felt like we needed to focus on our strength and our differentiation, which was the service. But there was always that big hill that we knew we had to take, which was around taste and never waste a good crisis. Right. And and things were tough, and it's it really moved us to action. And so we changed everything about our core product.
And although I guess we've already heard confirmation that college students don't drink beer, I guess the challenge I think you guys also had was a lot of people would, when you're growing up, quote unquote, you may not be ordering the Domino's pizza and having a few beers with it. It just seems it's just a different part of your life. But the way these guys have changed it, I was saying to the students earlier, for those of you who don't get to New York much, seeing on the Times Square billboard, real-time feedback from Domino's customers is something I don't think most companies would have the guts to do. I'd use another word, but this is mixed company. As I said in one of my more famous quotes, I don't think most companies would have the intestinal fortitude to do what you guys did. And yet, for us, it's a little bit of a different challenge, right? Because it's a strange job that I have where we're not your normal public company. On one hand, every one of those individual investors counts on us to get it right every single day. On the other hand, much of getting it right is pretty out of our control, right? I still get emails to this day, although fewer than I got during the crisis, where if the market would go down one day, I would get emails, because my email isn't hard to find, from individuals around the country saying things like, what the hell is wrong with you? You know, why aren't you making it work better? Do you know what this is doing to, you know, my retirement savings? And you feel for them. At the same time, if people are under the illusion that I come in and if I'm in a good mood, the market goes up, and if I'm in a bad mood, it goes down, we should dispense with that. You know, yeah, I was in a bad mood yesterday. I wasn't even in town yesterday. Maybe that was the problem.
That's why the Occupy Wall Street people are outside your office. They think it's your fault.
But I think the challenge we have is when the markets don't work properly, as they didn't in 2008, the only rational reaction an individual can have is to say, I don't understand it anymore. I'm not comfortable. I'm nervous. I'd rather just step back. And unfortunately, that's not a great outcome either, because it's like the line they have about you know, how long it takes to earn a good reputation and how easy it is to lose one. If the markets work and work and work, and then suddenly they don't work, it's hard to win those people's confidence back, and rightly so, by the way. Right, the burden of proof shift to the industry broadly, and I'm not sure those retail investors have come back. And it's almost 3 years later. I still don't think they're back.
How do you get them to, I don't know if I'm on here, how do you get them to accept risk again? And how do you?
Right. Yeah, and that's something I think that we were talking about, and when Patrick and I were talking about earlier, is I think not just in the markets in general, right? No one's going to sit here and say it's like, let's encourage everyone to start taking outsized risks and you know, get all leveraged up. At the same time, we got very nervous in 09 and 010 that intentionally or inadvertently, a lot of the feedback that was coming out of the administration in Washington and out of the policymakers, it seemed to be discouraging everyone from taking risk. And if you don't take risk, like every business, I mean, Tom Monahan took a lot of risk in 1960, right? And you know, every business that started, many of you in the room, I'm sure, started your own businesses, or you work for businesses that were started in some way, shape, or form by somebody taking some risk, right? And I feel like it almost became a bad word to say, oh, well, you know, no one should take risk anymore. Banks won't lend money to anyone who's a risky loan. If there's a banker in the room who basically thinks they only are allowed to make good loans because of pressure from Washington, they're going to make no loans, right? And I think that's the challenge we have, is that the community that we need to be getting capital to is actually starved right now. Right. So even those who are willing to take risk can't get the capital to do it now, right?
Yeah, I think
Wow. That may be the only round of applause I get today, so if some of you would like to come to Wayne State with me later, I may need a few friendly faces in the audience at Larry's place.
But I think it's, I mean, I think it's kind of part and parcel with the conversation around innovation. Is, you know, the dramatic move to kind of de-risk in the U.S. right now, and really globally, is a big part of what's slowing us down. And we got to get people to, you know, to start to want to take risk again, to innovate, to be willing to accept that there's going to be some failure again, and that's how we get the economy moving again.
And it's interesting, that word failure, right? It's like so many cultures now in the wake of something that just happened are afraid to fail, and yet the better companies see it as an opportunity and do things that they think that's the moment where you can change the game. And I think the country has a real issue if we're going to get out of this malaise. As I said to the students, I think it's more about Main Street than Wall Street. We're missing the point. It's the businesses on Main Street that need our attention, and unfortunately, the movement being so focused on the banks makes it easy for Congress to pretend it isn't a message for Congress too. It's a big message for Congress, and if we don't figure out in this country how to basically reinvent capital formation for small companies. And this is not a self-interested public service announcement because I want all these companies coming to the New York Stock Exchange. I'm talking about the companies that we all do business with every day in our private lives. If you think about the errands you run with your kids or with your families or where you go to eat on a Saturday night, they're rarely companies as big as the two that are sitting in front of you. They're frequently small companies that employ 10 or 20 people, and that's the lifeblood of the country, and we're starving them. Right, and I think that has to change, and all the other stuff is interesting, but that's the key thing that has to change.
But how do companies assess the risk? If you're a small company just getting started, well, maybe I'll bet the farm. But if we're a company your size,
right.
I mean, you're the third most.
Yeah, that's right.
Your company does you're the third largest company by transactions
in e-commerce. On e-commerce, yeah.
In the U.S.
Yeah.
And the NYSE is the largest exchange by anybody.
Matt will help me with this because I forget the thing we used in the last town hall meeting. But we were trying to say to our own people, like, we want you to be proud of our history, but we want you to be even prouder of what we've become. And you read about all these great technology companies, which both of us think that's what we've effectively become also, right? And what was the quote we put up that just we process like 2.5 times more than Google a day? We process 2.5 times more messages every day than Google does searches. Okay? Now that's not what people would have bet about your parents' New York Stock Exchange, right?
But when your companies are this big and this successful, how do you decide I'm going to accept the risk and go make a huge change, like change the menu or change your...
You hire outstanding leaders, right,
Yeah,
Patrick? I mean, isn't that what it's all about?
In conclusion.
I'll go with that one. Absolutely.
In conclusion.
But I think, Larry, I think it's interesting. I mean, if you think broadly, I mean, people have a strong bias against risk, and it's driven into people from a young age. I mean, you think about the medical community. You start with the Hippocratic Oath. First do no harm, right? That's about don't do something if there's any risk that doing something will cause a problem. The legal community, your liability goes up by doing something rather than not doing something. I mean, all through everything we do as leaders, our job is to break through that, to make sure that people understand that innovation comes with some risk and that's okay. It's acceptable. It's okay to fail. But you see it through everything. I can get into sports. I mean, it just, there is a strong bias against taking risk, and it's a very damaging thing. And as leaders, it's our job to break through that for our teams.
Create an environment. Create an environment where the people feel empowered and can take some chances. And as much progress as we've made, we think at our company, people are still a little afraid to fail because the old culture was so based on if you failed once, it was potentially fatal to your career there. You can't just say it once and fix it, right? And you have to lead from the front by doing it, saying we're willing to change it, we're willing to take those risks. And by the way, if we fail, you as the leader accept most of the burden of that, and if it works, you spread the success around as broadly as you can. All the obvious things, right? It's not rocket science. It's just creating an environment where people aren't afraid, and you make sure that it's measured risk, right? It's not. It's appropriate risk. It's not. And it's rare that companies have to bet the ranch, right? It's pretty rare. If you've gotten to the point where you have to bet the ranch to save the company, then you made a bunch of other mistakes already that it may be too late to correct, right? But I think Patrick hit it on the head. I think it's it's just creating that environment where people understand. I'm sure there was some pushback when you guys started saying you were going to be this transparent, knowing that all the feedback was knowing that all the feedback wasn't exactly going to be you guys are great.
Positive, no,
right?
There's no question.
Far from it, right?
Yeah.
There's another piece of innovation that both your companies are taking on: globalization. Everybody, that's one of the buzzwords for the last 10 years. Domino's is at a point where something like half your stores, half your revenue are outside the U.S. NYSE Euronext has been global for a long time through acquisitions and mergers and doing business, and now if you get to regulatory approval, you're going to be very global with the DB. When an American publicly held company like Domino's goes international, people rave about it and applaud. There was some emotional feedback when you announced this merger. What's the difference between the two? I mean, you're both publicly held American companies.
Thank you for reminding me of that, Larry. I sort of put that out of my memory as a faded memory, but no, there were a lot of it has to do with it all comes back to this risk thing again, right? And it's what what was America based on? What do we celebrate in this country, right? And what you celebrate is, here's a 50-year-old company that's gone global, and I'll let Patrick talk about, you know, how successful that's been. We sit there and say, well, we have by far the most iconic brand in our industry globally, and yet if we had only defended that icon, America's interests would not be served, because we would be irrelevant globally now, as hard as that is for people in this room to imagine, because other regions of the world, other countries in the world are pursuing much more of what I would call a national champion strategy with their local exchange. Now, the reason we had some emotion for a few days, I think, was really twofold. One, we're not in the same business that a lot of people are in. We operate in many markets around the world already, and in the markets in which we operate, in many of those places, we operate that country's only stock exchange. So they only get one shot at thinking about, if they want that exchange to be part of a bigger company, there is a lot of emotion tied to that, because if they get it wrong, there's no second bite at the apple, right? It's done. So they get very, very nervous. But the second thing was, I think we just had to educate some people, right? And it's not every policymaker's job to know the details about our industry. They didn't realize in many cases we already were global. They didn't realize we already were duly headquartered. They didn't realize that our board was already half United States citizens and half non-US citizens. I think those are all great things. I'm intensely proud of the fact of the transition we've engineered, and if we are going to be the biggest and best exchange company in the world next year that has a little more than a quarter, a little less than 30% of its business in the US and the rest outside of the world, and we've positioned this company that's duly headquartered in New York and Frankfurt to be the best, that's good for the United States, that's good for our shareholders, that's good for our stakeholders. And by the way, that 30/70 number, look up what P&G's numbers are, look up what Coca-Cola's numbers are, a little closer to home, look at where GM sells its cars. This is what America's all about. I think you get a more of emotional reaction because of the business we are and who we are, right? Yeah. But I think that's why it's different. But the reaction on your side should have been great, right? I mean,
yeah, clearly it has been, and I think, you know, the difference is, you know, I mean, you're kind of part of the patrimony of the country, right? I mean, it's, you know, and there's some emotion around that, but I think it goes back to innovation and risk, and it was inevitable. You had to do this. You say if you didn't do it, it's going to be obsolete.
It's going to be different.
And so you have to do it. And everything is on a global scale now. I mean, 20, 30 years ago, you know, there were boardroom discussions about, you know, should we be going into global, international? Right. And if, you know, and if you don't, right? I mean, I was at Gerber before I was here, a terrific company, terrific brand. It was overwhelmingly a domestic company. Right. And I actually worked on the international side trying to push that forward. But, you know, ultimately it's, you know, Gerber is owned now by Nestle, and it's because Nestle had a global footprint. Right. And they could take that brand and spread it around. And so the fact that it didn't go global early on is probably why Gerber isn't an independent company today.
And we talk a lot about innovation, right? It's a big part of innovation is, are you spotting the trends correctly, and are you positioning your company to take advantage of those trends? The globalization isn't a fad, right? I mean, it's, you know, and I think it's an exciting opportunity for U.S. multinationals that if we end up being a smaller percentage of a much larger pie, that math is fairly easy to do. And yet when you go to Washington and try to do that math, it's not always quite as easy to convince them that the math is as simple as we just outlined. And the other thing I think we miss is you take a great consumer brand like yours. I'm guessing that you guys are rooting for the emerging part of the world to successfully create 500 million new consumers, because that's a huge opportunity for your company globally, right? No, I know I'm stating the obvious, but
that's exactly right.
I don't know why that's not a good thing for most of the companies in the U.S. either, right?
Yeah, and I think what's happened is, you know, over the last 20 years, as some of the big developing economies have grown and developed, there was a point in time, which frankly is passing pretty quickly, where there was such a labor cost differential between, you know, what there was in the U.S. or Western Europe and some of these developing economies that, you know, there was some natural shift there. But as those things are, as they're evening out, which is happening very, very quickly. You know, you just don't see that same level of dislocation anymore.
Right. And one more point, Larry, before we give the microphone back to the mediator, but we're just trying to be good conversationalists, so hopefully it's working.
And you're doing a great job.
Now I lost my point. That's how good my short-term memory is. But if you think about that last point, Patrick's last point on this is really, really interesting, right? Because particularly when you have Dan here in a few weeks, you told me Dan's coming in a few weeks, right? Or if you talk to Alan at Ford, same story. This movement that a lot of the big U.S. companies did to shift a lot of the sort of lower value-added, typically manufacturing jobs overseas, there's a lot of things that have happened in the last 18 to 24 months, and in my personal opinion, you're going to start to see a shift back here, as long as we get some boundaries from the policymakers that say, you know, we don't need clarity, we make decisions every day in our business without perfect information, right? But I think we do need some boundaries, but it's the labor arbitrage.
Absolutely.
It's the commodity price boom in the last 5 years. You go build a car in Asia, and you've got to ship it here to sell it. By the time you bring it back here, the transport cost is really high. And what's happened in the U.S. in the heavily unionized businesses in the last couple of years is everybody finally got their interests aligned, and we were talking about that with Dan Dan this morning. In fact, the union's interests and management's interests are finally aligned, right? So if you say the labor arbitrage gap is closing, the unions here have gotten more reasonable and are willing to trade, you know, lower fixed income for more variable income if they help the company succeed, and the transport costs are skyrocketing, it's not crazy to think you're going to see those jobs created back here in the U.S. again, right?
Well, it's going to go from, you know, being about cost of labor to quality of labor.
Right, and productivity and all that kind of stuff. Right.
And the jobs are going to follow where the quality of labor is, because the unit cost differential on labor is going away in a hurry.
Yep.
Government policies come up a couple of times here. You've talked about, Duncan's talked about, business leaders need to lead from the front, that they need to be active in helping government set policy, not just standing back and waiting for it to come out and then edit. If you're a business leader, how do you get involved in government policy setting when there's always 2 or 3 different opinions and not get caught in the middle?
That's a great question, because if it just turns into lobbying, it's interesting, but it's not terribly impactful or relevant, and we're all supposed to be running our companies too, right? So the way we think about it is the following. What I meant when I said that was the point I was just alluding to a minute ago, right? If we all sit around and wait for perfect information from Washington, I haven't met too many CEOs that think we're likely to get it. And my point is, why are we waiting for it? Like, we're deciding to do a game-changing merger in our industry with the best information we could gather, but a lot of instinct and a lot of intuition, right? That's how we make all of our decisions in most companies, right? You try to get it right, you do your homework, you work your rear end off, but then you have to follow your instincts and your intuition. So what I've been saying to a lot of fellow CEOs is, we're not going to get what you want, particularly going into an election year. You're even less likely to get clarity because it's too risky. In an election year, there's too much at stake next year. So let's stop waiting, and let's just do things where we think we can make a difference. So in our case, some of it was around financial literacy. In some case, it was around sponsoring Global Entrepreneurship Week. We advocate like crazy for some of the stuff I shared with you earlier about getting capital to small companies, refocusing the country's attention on Main Street, trying to reinvent the microfinance industry in this country. Like, now you put all that into, who knows what difference it makes, but you put all that into the recipe and you see if it makes a difference, and you find where you can get support. What you won't find us doing is, you know, pushing something up the hill on healthcare policy. I don't know anything about it. Our company isn't in the middle of that discussion. That should be someone else's job. But my overarching point is, what are we waiting for? Like, if we think there's some good we can do, and if our main premise is to just leave it better than we found it, we can sit here and wait and wait and wait. It doesn't accomplish anything. So, like, I want to be in the solutions business, I don't want to figure out where the complaint bureau is and go to the window and file my complaint. I'd rather be in the solutions business. And we don't know if any of the stuff we're talking about is going to galvanize anything, but I like what Howard Schultz is doing too. I don't know if you've seen some of the stuff Howard's doing. It's just leading from the front and trying to have people take a step back and say, hey guys, we can do this. Like, we're capable of making a positive difference. Let's just go make one. Like, because yeah, the policy should all be tied to job creation. It's probably not going to be for a while. So let's go do what we can to create jobs in our own ways, right?
Yep.
I think. I mean, so.
I like it. Now, all of you talk to other CEOs in your jobs, on your boards and all that kind of stuff, and so you get insights from them about how things are going. Some of those CEOs are leading companies that are just out there in the front edge and exploding in growth. Some of them are, Duncan's phrase, becoming a little irrelevant. What's the difference? Why does one company take off and another one, equally skilled, not?
Oh boy.
There's a book in this if you come up with the right answer.
Yeah, I really think it goes back to the same place, though, right? I mean, it's about are you willing to to view the dislocation we've had in the economy as being a great opportunity to drive change and drive innovation in your business, or do you take a very conservative view and say, look, times are tough, so what we're going to do is hunker down and just kind of ride this out until things go back to where they were. And the people who are taking that approach are going to fail. At least a great number of them are. It doesn't work. The world has changed. It's different. If we were still clinging to the idea that an adequate pizza that would only be ordered over the phone and not over the internet or not on the iPhone now, we're going to be obsolete. We're going to be gone in a few years. And so, leadership is about accepting that, this kind of turbulence is actually a wonderful opportunity for businesses. It's when share shifts. It's when great things are done. Typically, great things aren't accomplished when the environment is stable because people say, okay, this is easy, I can just do what I've been doing. Right. And, in an economic environment like this, it's a huge opportunity. And I think it's when you see businesses, really go down different paths of, are we going to change and adapt and grow and view this as this fabulous opportunity, or are we going to hunker down and try to wait for the storm to pass and keep our heads down? And people who do that fail.
And even if there's no storm, that's all still true, right? So the road is just littered with people who were afraid to throw away what worked, right? Littered with people. And there's plenty of businesses. That's why I make that comment to our own team about the 18th century, 21st century thing, because there were a bunch of other companies around in the 18th and 19th century that are long gone, right? Because for whatever reason, they decided, and history is replete with great quotes, like, why would we, as long as there's enough people to ride bicycles, why would we ever change the mail service? That was a famous quote from the UK in the early 1900s, right? Because everything was forever going to be delivered by bicycle messenger, right? Yep. And the challenge is, every company's got to do it. We talk a lot about, at our company, I'm sure the first time someone walked into the Coca-Cola chief executive's office and said, the future's in bottled water, right? we are going to take water, we're going to put it in bottles, we're going to come up with a fancy brand name for it, and people are going to love it and they're going to pay for it. The kind of CEOs Patrick's talking about, that CEO has a choice to make right then, right? He or she can say, that's the greatest idea I've ever heard, go chase it, or he can say, well, who the hell's ever going to do that? And the answer is only everybody, right? That's who's going to do that, only everybody, right? And so the idea is you never know where it's coming from, and yet a lot of people are so risk averse, it's easier to play the hand you have than to change the hand, right? And I just sent my monthly note to my employees yesterday, and one of the things I said in there is, if I didn't have confidence in every one of them to be able to do what we're trying to do right now, which is really complicated, I wouldn't have done it. So it's not enough that I would have confidence in myself or my 3 or 4 direct reports. I needed to have confidence in all of them that they were ready and that they could do it and that we could change the industry while also running our own business. And if you didn't believe in your team, you never would do it. And a lot of people, I just think, don't have the confidence in their team that they're not willing to take what they, and then suddenly a manageable risk becomes an outside risk, right?
Exactly,
and you don't do it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is you've got to take at least a reasonably long-term view on your business and your company and where you want to be. And if you get into the quarter-to-quarter game, and it leads you nowhere. Right. It absolutely leads you nowhere.
But it's human nature too, right? If you do something, you're more likely to get blamed for it if it goes wrong than if you do nothing, right? That's right. It's the old commission versus omission. If you don't do anything,
risk.
It could take a long time for people to figure out it was a mistake to do nothing, right? So I mean, but if you do something, it's going to be pretty clear pretty quickly.
Yep.
Like you're accountable now, right? It's either going to work or it's not. You had nowhere to hide, and frankly, most people would rather hide, I think. And I think it's easier to just stay the course because it's safer,
Yep.
right?
We've only got a minute or two here. Someone wants to find innovation as being bold enough to confront the elephant in the room, and then, to your point, go do something about it. For a business in the world, what's the next couple big elephants we need to confront?
Social media, I guess. I mean, what do you think's the
Oh
next
boy, yeah. I mean,
It's a long list, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, certainly social media is huge. It's central to who we are now. I mean, most companies right now are trying to figure out how you can tie social media to their mass media strategy. We've done exactly the opposite. Social media leads marketing at Domino's. It is about the social media. It's the consumers own the brand. What they think about the brand is clearly far more important than what we think about the brand. And if you look at the advertising we're doing today, the advertising is a reflection of social media, sometimes literally. I mean, you talked about the Times Square example. We ran the Twitter and Facebook commentary across a live across only edited for language. And I didn't mean French. And we did lose a couple that way, but. And our advertising was about what was happening in social media. So, it's a huge one. I think, I think talent and acquiring talent becomes more and more important. The days of companies being about, a dozen or 20 or 40 people at the top, making all of the decisions, and all you needed to do was kind of fill in. The people into very defined roles. That doesn't work anymore. And you've got to be thinking about how are we going to fill our company with hundreds or thousands of talented people who are going to be bubbling ideas up, and finding that talent and developing that talent becomes critical, more important today than I think it's ever been.
Before we get to audience questions, Duncan, do you have an elephant or two quickly?
Yeah, so it's very similar, and the bottom line on all of this is the technological advancements we've seen in the last quarter century mean the pace of change is going to be increasingly faster, right? So historically, you would make a big decision, you think it's a game changer, and if you got it right, the reward was you'd have a first mover advantage for an extended period of time, right? And the problem is that extended period of time is shrinking. And what the internet enables you to do, or what technology enables you to do, as it becomes more ubiquitous, it's a challenge for companies that face off with the consumer every minute, because you're right, the blogosphere can decide how you guys do now, right? Because it's all out there. And Patrick did assure me, by the way, before we sat down, that the expletive-laden comments that were removed were all very positive about the pieces. It's all very, very good. They were euphoric about how good it was, and that's why. But their comment couldn't get on there. That's the way it goes. But the second thing is you think of all the companies. Now, you can be a pretty small company and have customers all over the world now. And that was never really possible before. And I think that's something everybody has to really just get their arms around and figure out how do you harness that. And for us, the big issue for us is going to be how do we position the company, because it goes back to your don't think about the quarter, but as Buffett said, think about the quarter century. Having created a company that we believe the emerging exchanges of the world will want to join, that's great. Those countries' exchanges will not join in my tenure as the CEO. And how do you make sure you set the company up that whoever comes next, the company is positioned to where that can happen? And that's how long a lead time you have to have on that. And that's a big, big issue for us, because only one exchange group is going to be the partner for Asia as it develops, and that we want that to be us.
Yeah.
Great. David.
Thank you. Thank you. This format's a little different because Larry's been asking questions, and normally we have a presentation and follow-up questions. So several of the questions were already answered, and several of them have the same themes. So I'm going to try and ask a question that covers many people, and a couple of them get complicated. So we'll start with Duncan.
They'll handle those.
Great. My life isn't complicated enough already. Great.
Greece's problems, is this only the beginning of a bigger Euro problem? And is the it did say Duncan on time. And is the United States behaving in a way that we could look like that someday, or are we in a shorter term on the way to losing the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency?
Wow.
Check.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to keep each answer less than 1 minute.
If one of my team put that question in, I'm going to have words with them on the way home, I can tell you that. Well, thank you for that softball question. And thank you guys for the invite. Why did we come here again? What are we doing? It was great. It was a lot of fun. I think we are spending a lot of time in Europe, as you would imagine, right now. And I think just a few observations to sort of set the mood a little bit, okay? A lot of Americans think that the EU is a currency experiment that's been going on for about 10 years with a single currency. And the first thought I want to leave you with is that's not what this is all about, right? For those of you who are students of history, the EU project is about my age. It's around 50 years old, almost 55 years old. And that period of time coincides with the most peaceful 50 to 60 years that part of the world has had in a millennium. So anybody who thinks that because there's some sovereign debt issues and there's a couple of countries that are maybe struggling to stay in the, amongst the member states, that the response to this is to unravel it, like put that out of your minds. That's just simply not going to happen. There's too much at stake, right? There's way too much at stake. Now, what's going on with Greece specifically right now is a lot of people would say Greece probably never should have been admitted. Well, we've all got 20/20 vision when we look backwards with or without LASIK surgery. And yeah, okay, maybe they shouldn't have been admitted. It doesn't matter. The fact is they're in. So we can sit here and whine and complain about how they got in. Who cares? They're in, right? And there's clearly some issues there. Now, what I think has happened in the last 48 hours looks something like the following. So here's the second thought I want to leave you with. This idea that you will read in a lot of the media here by people who, I'll leave out the expletives, but don't really know what they're talking about, all right? Present company excluded, of course, is this idea that the other member states are just going to kick a country or two out is, read the fine print. Okay, the decisions are unanimous. Yep. It has to be unanimous to remove a country from the EU. It creates a potential daisy chain, and as I was saying to Patrick, only half kiddingly, imagine the scenario where the member states are sitting around a table, and the decision is, guys, do you want to kick Greece out? And by the way, it has to be unanimous. How do you think the Portuguese guy is going to vote? Right. The Portuguese guy is not going to vote to kick Greece out, because what's likely to happen is they're going to say, guys, before you get up, you know what? We have one more agenda item. Let's talk about our friends sitting over there. It's not going to happen. So what happened in the last 48 hours is, I think it's Greece trying to exit themselves because they have concluded they will not be asked to leave, because the process for asking them to leave actually won't lead to them being asked to leave. So it seems to me, and I have no idea, I know Papandreou a little bit, but not nearly well enough. He did not consult me on this decision. I don't want there to be no doubt about that. I think what happened in the last 48 hours is they're trying to find a way to exit themselves. That's the nearest I can figure, and I'm not a political scientist. But Europe's going to fight through this. It's going to be difficult, and there's going to be challenges. They did not take their medicine in 2008 the way the U.S. banks did. We can be angry about what happened. We can be angry about how TARP was done. We can be angry about this, that, and the other thing. The fact is, it solved the problem. It was tough medicine for a tough moment in time, and the administration, particularly led by Treasury, did what had to be done to get it done. Europe never did it. Europe did not do what the U.S. banks did in 2008 or 9. They thought the problem would solve itself. It didn't solve itself. And now you have a whole host of issues where bank balance sheets are not what they should be in Europe, on top of which you have sovereign issues that the U.S. frankly doesn't have. Last point I will make on this, in terms of the U.S. being the reserve currency, there's not really a contender for it not to be right now, right? If these problems hadn't happened in the euro, you could argue that we might be having more of a debate. There's nothing to debate right now, right? There's no other currency is ready to be the reserve currency, but America should not think that that is a foregone conclusion that it will forever have the reserve currency. It is something that I think we make a mistake if we take it for granted. So what we say to the policymakers is, you have no idea how much flexibility it gives you to be the country that has the reserve currency. Don't squander the opportunity. And please don't take it for granted. So, I don't know, what would you add to that?
We sell pizza in Greece. Yeah.
How are sales? How are sales? And
sales have been a little soft.
Yeah, but see, we heard
we're
just,
hot selling down to the protesters.
We hear just the opposite, right? Because the other thing you have going on in Europe is there's not a strong sense that they're in. I think the rest of the world wants us to have the Europeans express to us that they acknowledge they're in a major crisis and they're willing to do something about it,
and
right?
I think, and that's there is a referendum on leadership going on right now in Europe that is stunning. I think what Angela Merkel was willing to do and push through the parliament was stunning.
Pretty strong.
I mean, and looking down the road and what stability means for Germany longer term, and was willing to do things that were remarkable sacrifice for them to underwrite other countries. And I think, frankly, you've seen now the opposite in Greece. And you know, we'll see longer term. But, you know, I mean, we, you know, get in a pitch for, you know, our lieutenant governor here. I mean, and what we have had happen in Michigan is really pretty stunning. I mean, there's been real leadership here in the past year. We were one of 5 states with a balanced budget in the U.S. right now. And that's not easy, right? I mean, you know, nobody wants to be the governor or lieutenant governor in charge of taking things away. And there was a point in time when that needed to happen, and it's what sets the foundation to start growing again. It does. And so I think we've got a fine example here, and I think we've got some pretty remarkable examples going opposite directions in Europe right now. And
that I want you to stay on that last point that Patrick just made, because that's really important. As one of our board members says, it's not a long-term strategy to shrink yourself to greatness, right? So austerity and belt tightening may be step one, but it's got to be done with the purpose that when it's done, the environment is fertilized to then have pro-growth policies, whether it's the capital formation we talked about earlier or other policies. And I think that's what the Europeans are struggling with right now, is how do they get, they haven't yet done a good job of explaining to the populace, this is a necessary first step, and then we will get to the business of trying to grow the economies again. And lastly, maybe I'm sympathetic because I'm spending a lot of time over there, and we're about to be hopefully operating a company whose really center will be more European than American or Asian. But before we're too critical, let's just remind ourselves of one last thing, and then I promise I'm trying to drag this one out as long as I can, because if there's more tough questions, this is fewer than I can answer. Right? But let's remind ourselves of one thing. We're having trouble getting Democrats and Republicans to agree in this country, okay? And we're asking 17 to 27 different countries, depending on what the discussion under debate is, many of whom have been at war with each other for most of their histories, to kind of sit around a table and work out some solutions together. So before we're too critical on them, let's just remember, we have Democrats and Republicans that we're having trouble getting to do things in a bipartisan way, right? So just keep all that in context, but this is a moment in history that'll be a test of leadership, like you said. No further questions?
We'll start with Patrick on this one.
What's your favorite topic?
Please.
I get
little nervous right now.
What's your favorite pizza?
Duncan saved you the really tough one. I can't find it. It's at the bottom. It's at the bottom of the pile. A number of questions about healthy food. And you can imagine from gluten-free wheat to organically grown products to less fat, et cetera, for kids who are making bad choices.
Yep. Yeah.
What do we as a society, it wasn't just for Domino's, but what do we do about it?
Yeah, it's actually a great question, and a little easier to explain than what's happening in the EU right now. Actually, there are a lot of answers on that, and we think we're really leading this area. First of all, we launched in the last year, 18 months, and we're the only national pizza company that's done this. We've got something called Smart Slice, which we sell into schools. It's lower sodium, lower fat. And it's just a much healthier pizza that we sell into schools as kind of a sub-brand, if you will. And we're excited about that. We actually, it's interesting because, the consumer has they still talk about health, and sometimes don't act on it quite as aggressively. And from a marketing perspective, it's interesting. The pizza we just launched 4 to 6 weeks ago, the artisan pizza, we launched about taste and about being a little bit more gourmet than what you're used to from Domino's. It is also dramatically healthier. But we're not leading with that. If we went out and launched it as a healthy pizza, we wouldn't sell any of it. And so, it's about the taste. The other thing that we think is important is, we've been voluntarily for I think about 12 years now, putting all of our nutritional information out there so that people can make good choices. You go onto our website, there are really nifty tools on there for letting people educate themselves about it. But it's as we look at it, it's about number one, making the information available so people can make good choices. Second, the artisan pizza, don't tell anybody outside of the room. It's actually a lot healthier than it's a pretty great meal.
It's already been tweeted. It's too late.
Yeah, I know. It's already out. But it is. But it's interesting because as we tested the different ways of marketing it, clearly the taste as the primary focus was still what was going to be most compelling. And then the third for us is schools. We've got an obligation there. We're the only national pizza company making a product that actually meets what will be the mandated guidelines a year from now. The government now has mandated nutritional profile on pizzas going into schools. We're the only ones that have done it. We've had it for about 18 months now.
Great.
So
one of our
are you guys doing gluten-free stuff now as well?
Not yet.
Gluten-free. Okay. We may have some guys in the audience that are going to pressure you on that a little bit
I know.
at the end of the meeting, and they know who they are.
It was time.
Thank you, Duncan. That was part of the question.
Yep.
too, so.
Yep. Nope. Give it a little time.
Sorry. Thank you.
One of our other great Michigan companies, Kelly Services, has a very strong correlation to the economy, and so they're a good predictor of it. Are pizza sales predictive? Are they
Absolutely
reactive? And in the end of it is, does that mean we're headed towards the second mild recession in this decade?
Pizza sales correlate to employment more than anything else. I mean, in terms of kind of predicting, what's going to happen with our business, we have to predict employment levels. Employed people buy more pizza than unemployed people, period. And, we may be a little bit recession resistant, but we are certainly not recession proof. And so, the unemployment levels in the U.S. are still absolutely a wind in our face as opposed to a tailwind for us. So, as that improves, it'll get better. And the pizza industry, we're clearly kind of leading the industry right now, but the pizza industry is doing a little bit better this year overall, the category. So to the extent to which there's good news in there, but I think probably there are other factors, shocking though it may be for me to admit this, there are probably other factors that will be more predictive of what's going to happen on a double dip than pizza sales.
Thank you very much. Steve?
Thank you. I want to say this. We see a lot of CEOs coming through here, and both to Duncan and to Patrick. Thank you for leading from the front. You guys are really incredible. It's easy to see what we get with you guys leading. So thank you. So thanks for being with us today. Larry Phobes, terrific job as moderator, and David Breen, you're the best. Thank you again as presiding officer. Ladies and gentlemen, we know you've got a lot of things to do. We appreciate the fact that you spent your lunchtime with us. So this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.